Hey guys, Vincent here from the creativedojo.net. Today in this video, I just want to go over how I created this kind of asteroid field. This is actually a video response or a tutorial response to my recent Element 3D giveaway where we got a lot of space entries. A lot of them were pretty good, a lot of them were pretty bad, and so I got a lot of requests asking how do I create a pretty decent space scene with some planets, some asteroids, and stuff like that, like the winners. And so today I thought I would break it down to you guys just a little bit. Today we're going to be using Element 3D, but in a later tutorial I'll be doing the same thing with Particular and Cinema 4D, so stay tuned for that. But this is what we're going to be creating today. So as you can see, we have some pretty basic star particles in the background. We have our nice asteroid field that reacts to our light properly, or our sun here. And we have a nice big planet, some atmosphere, and some glows. And of course, we're going to be doing some color correction and color grading. And all this is done inside After Effects using Element 3D for the most part. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to create a new composition for this tutorial. And we'll call this main comp. 720p at 10 seconds long. Hit OK. And so now I'm going to create a black background, just for the sake of having a black background. Now that we have a black background to get rid of transparency and stuff, I'm going to go ahead and bring in my space background 01. And this is simply nothing more than a black solid with a whole bunch of little white dots and space dust that I created in Photoshop. So pretty simple here. I'll probably post a link to this little image here so you can download it and use it for your projects in the article down below at Creative Dojo. But this is pretty simple. You can actually create this using maybe a fractal noise and some smoke dust here. But here I just have a nice pre-made background. And I'm going to make it a 3D layer. And I'm going to push it all the way back in Z space here. So I'm going to hit P on the keyboard to bring up the position. And I'm just going to push it back all the way in Z space. Push it far back. And I'm going to scale it up pretty large. Now doing so is not going to create any pixelation here because yes, we are scaling it up, but we're also pushing it back in Z space to make it a little bit smaller. So in relative scale, we still have the same image here, except it's kind of pushed back in Z space. And the reason why we're pushing it back in Z space is to kind of create this larger depth area, because if the space field is too close to the camera, it's going to move very similar to the asteroids, the planets, and stuff like that. And I want to create a really big environment here. So we want to create some nice parallaxing, so things that are in front of the camera are moving a little bit different than things that are really far back. So we're essentially creating a fake 3D depth here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new camera. And let's go ahead and make it a pretty wide angle lens, maybe a 24mm here. We'll call it camera. And we'll uncheck depth of field here, hit OK. So let me go ahead and just reposition this camera, push it all the way in a little bit. And let's go ahead and get started first with the asteroids, because that's probably the most important part, and we'll go back and refine it. So let's go ahead and create a new solid layer. So layer new solid. We'll call this asteroids, hit OK. And then we'll go to Effect, Video Copilot, Element 3D. And then we'll go into the scene setup. Now, if you want to create your own asteroid in Cinema 4D, 3ds Max, or maybe you have already a asteroid modeled and ready to go, then I would suggest using that model. For this tutorial, I'm actually going to be using a starter pack model here, and the starter pack comes with Element 3D by default, so you don't have to go out and buy a purchase model pack or anything like that. It actually comes with Element 3D by default. And then you can use Rock 01, Rock 02, or Rock 03. I would suggest using all three rocks and using a multi-object in Element 3D, but for this tutorial, I'll just use one simple rock here, and we'll change the rotation and all that stuff a little bit later, but I'm going to be using Rock 02, but again, feel free to use all the rocks to give you more dynamic and variation in rocks here. So this is our asteroid here. I'll go into the textures and just do some really quick tweaks. I'll go ahead and decrease the diffuse a little bit, and decrease the specular a little bit. And then maybe we can go into the diffuse a little bit and maybe just pull down the saturation just a little bit. And then hit OK. And then hit OK. And then you can't really see our rock right now because it's kind of far back. So let me go into the particle replicator, which is kind of like the emitter of the element here. And we'll just push it back in Z space until we see our rock. And there is our rock. We just push it back in Z space just a little bit more. And we'll change the replicator shape, which is kind of like the emitter once again, to a 3D grid. So now we have a grid of asteroids. Looks pretty bad. Let's go ahead and expand this grid by increasing the size in X. And we'll go ahead and increase the size in Z. So we have some depth here. And we'll definitely increase it in Y just a little bit. And as you can see, everything's very uniform and there's no variation here. As you can see, it looks completely like a grid. So let me go into the scatter and we'll just scatter this thing up. And by increasing the scatter amount, you kind of just randomize the position and scatter these little asteroids around a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and increase the number of particles in Z. So we just add some more particles here. And then maybe we can add a little bit in the X. And then add some more scatter here. So now we just have a whole bunch of particles everywhere. And now we want to make this look a little bit more dynamic. So we'll go into the particle look, which controls the actual individual particles here. And we'll go into the size randomness. We'll pull it up to 100%. We want some variation here. And then we also want to pull up the size, so they're a little bit larger. And then I also want to go into the rotation and then go to random rotation and just increase the random rotation. So we have a whole bunch of different rotated asteroids here. And if you did use multiple rocks here, rock 01, 02, and 03, you would go into multi-object and enable multi-object, and then you would have, more rocks here. But for this tutorial, we'll use rock 02. We'll go ahead and increase the size a little bit. And we'll also kind of reposition our asteroid field here. It's a little bit off a little bit. And we'll push it back into Z space just a little bit more. We want to create a really nice big depth area. So this is looking pretty good. Now the most important part in this kind of tutorial or this in this animation here is to actually light everything up correctly and make it look good. And that's probably the hardest part, which will require a lot of tinkering here. So let me just leave it at that. We'll go ahead and create a new light. And just for future sake, we'll just call this NLF, which stands for Null Light Factory. And again, we'll be using Null Light Factory for this, but of course you can use optical flares. I'm going to create a point light, and I'll make it at perhaps 90% intensity. And for this tutorial, I'm just going to make a pretty nice warm tone for now. We can always go back and color grade this thing and make it look completely different. But I just want to get the light in properly. So as you can see, our space background disappears because it is a 3D layer and it's reacting to light. So I want to go into our space background here and hit AA to bring up the material options. And we'll go into accept lights and we'll turn it to off. And so now our background is not affected by our lights. And now we kind of want to reposition our light to where it creates a nice shading of our asteroid. So we'll just kind of push it back in Z space here. And you can kind of see what it does. It creates a nice shading and lighting for our asteroids. And of course, we'll go back and tinker around with this stuff, but we'll just leave it at that for now. So we want our light source to be kind of in the background here. And so it's going to create these nice shine and kind of specular highlights in the rocks. But again, we'll go back to this a little bit later. But for now, we'll just leave it at that, pretty dark. And we'll shut off the asteroids for now. And let's go ahead and work on our planet here. So for our planet, we're also going to be using Element 3D as well. We'll go to Layer, New, Solid. And we'll call this Planet. And under Effect, we'll apply Element. And we'll go into the scene setup. Now for our model, I'm actually going to be using one of Andrew Kramer's model. And you can get this model for free on his blog at videocopilot.net. He pretty much did a blog post on a 3D planet that he did, and he released a model for free here. So go ahead and download his model and put it into your My Models folder for Element. And then once you have it, you can select it in your model browser here. And so now we have a nice 3D planet to use. We'll go into the material options again. And I want to just kind of play around with this a little bit. I want to diffuse the color to kind of like this warm orange color a little bit. So kind of tinting it already. And as you can see, we get this really harsh specular highlight here. So let me just go ahead and just lower down the specular just a little bit. And of course, if you want to turn on the lights, we can go into the illumination and increase the intensity of that. And then you're going to get some city lights here, which may not be appropriate for what we're doing unless you kind of want to represent Earth here. So let me just leave it at that. We'll change it to 200, hit OK. And again, it's too far back, so let me go ahead and go into the particle replicator and push it back into Z space. There's our planet. And you kind of want to position it to where the light affects it pretty nice. We want to kind of create this ellipse. So we'll just move it to the right a little bit, and we'll push it back in Z space. And again, that's looking pretty good where we kind of have an ellipse here. And again, we're pushing it back in Z space because we want it to react to the lights, as well as create a very nice parallax look. So we'll go into the particle look. We'll increase the size. Something rather large. And then we'll just kind of reposition it. And as you can see, we kind of get this eclipse look here. We'll also push it back just a little bit more, just so we get this nice ellipse look. Something like that looks okay. We may want to move our light just a little bit, so we'll go here and just push it here. And then I think we're ready now to start creating our sun, so we'll go ahead and create a new solid. We'll call this No Light Factory. Of course, you can use optical flares if you want. I prefer No Light Factory because they have a more realistic look to them. So we'll go to No Light Factory, and you can do this with optical flares as well. But what we want to do is we want to attach our lens flare to our light here. So under the light source naming, we can change the name to match our light here. So our light is called No Light Factory. That's our prefix here. So we'll just call it No Light Factory and hit OK. And then we'll check use lights, and that's going to attach our lens flare to our light here. And then I want to go hit F4 to bring up the transfer modes or blending modes and change the blending mode of our flare from normal to add. And we'll go into the options here, and I want to select a pretty nice flare. So I'm going to select a preset called EH4 and then hit OK. And so now we have a pretty nice sun. We'll go ahead and maybe increase the brightness here. So increase it just a little bit, and then go ahead and increase the scale. And we want to create a pretty large sun because we kind of want to overwhelm the planet a little bit. And we also want to emphasize and make it more dramatic for the asteroid. And we can kind of suppress some of this brightness later on when we do some color correction and stuff like that. And so I want to go back into the planet here. And I want to go ahead and go back and, decrease the specular just a little bit more because it was a little bit too much. Hit OK. And that's looking a little bit better. We'll go ahead and duplicate the planet and drag this one underneath. We'll call this one glow. And then we're going to create a glow for our planet here. So we'll go into the scene setup, go into our material here, and I want to shut off the diffuse, the specular. I want to shut off pretty much everything. We'll go down to the illumination. We'll set it to 0. We'll go into the diffuse color, and I want to select a pretty warm color here. So maybe like orange red. Hit OK. So now we have just pretty much a sphere in the background that's orange, and then we want to apply first of all a fast blur to the glow, and then we'll increase the blurriness, and that's going to create a pretty decent kind of glow to wrap around our planet here, and that's going to kind of emphasize the kind of flare eclipse here from the sun. And we'll repeat edge pixels, and then if you want, you can apply a glow to this layer here. So we'll apply a stylized glow, and then you want to play around the threshold a little bit, and then of course play around the intensity. Then we can tint this a little bit later, but let me go ahead and do some basic color correction. So we'll apply a color correction curves as well as color correction and tint. And we'll just shut this tint off for now. Let's go ahead and make it a little bit more dramatic here. So we'll kind of decrease the brightness, a little more contrast, and then warm it up a little bit. Something like that. And then maybe we can pull down the blue channel, and then just kind of tinker around with the green a little bit. And then we can kind of desaturate it just a little bit. Maybe around 26%. And we'll go ahead and apply a curves as well as a tint to our main planet here. So curves. And then we really want to make this planet more dramatic and really emphasize that eclipse here. So let's go ahead and just add some contrast. Lower down the brightness a little bit. And we don't really have to focus too much on this planet because it's going to be kind of in the background, kind of as a subtle asset. So don't worry too much about it. And then of course you want to tint it just a little bit, kind of desaturate it. And then you may want to play around with color as well. So I want to take out some of the blue here. I may play around with the green. Something like that, something kind of washed out. And again, you may want to play around with the material of this planet. It looks a little bit off right now, but so let's go ahead and create more of an atmosphere for our planet. So we'll go ahead and create a new solid. We'll call this one smoke atmosphere. And for this one, we're going to apply a noise. Actually, let's go to the effects and presets here. We'll search in fractal noise, drag that into our smoke atmosphere. And we'll drag the smoke atmosphere underneath our planet, but above our glow here. And then we'll go ahead and change the blending mode from normal to maybe soft light or overlay. And that's going to create a nice smoky atmosphere for our planet, as well as give our star background a little more texture here. Of course, we're going to need to do some tweaking to this thing, so let's go ahead and maybe decrease the contrast a little bit. And you may want to play around with the fractal type, maybe like turbulent, smooth or something, just to give some more variation here. So maybe dynamic twist. Yeah, we'll stick with dynamic twist and play around with the transform here to create more detail in the smoke or larger smoke here. I think a value at 125 is pretty well. Maybe increase the complexity for more detail to around 8. And then I want to go ahead and create this, make this a 3D layer. And just like before, we're going to push it back in Z space a little bit. And then scale it up. And then I also want to hit AA and turn off accept lights once again. So now we have our smoke here. And just create a pretty nice atmosphere. And of course you want to color correct this a little bit. So let's go ahead and go to curves. Let me add some contrast to this. And then we can also turn down the opacity for the smoke atmosphere a little bit, just so it's not so vibrant. And then we can also decrease the opacity of the star background a little bit too. Maybe around 84%. And then let's go ahead and turn back on our asteroids here. And as you can see, it's starting to look a little bit better, reacting to our light a little bit better. Let's go ahead and put the asteroids above our planet. And that's looking a little bit better. We may want to color correct this too, so we'll apply curves. We'll add some contrast. And you know what, we'll just bring it above our no light factory here. And we want to really emphasize that specular here, so we want to make it very dramatic, the lighting here. Don't worry too much about the shadows, we can always create an ambient light for that. And then we also want to warm it up to match our environment as best we can. Something like that. And then we can go ahead and create a ambient light for the asteroids here. So let's go ahead and create a light. We'll make an ambient light to kind of fill in the missing gaps. We'll change the intensity to maybe 5%, and we'll go ahead and decrease the color as well. And that kind of fills in the missing gaps here. And we also maybe want to adjust that to maybe around 3%. And of course, this can use a little bit more color correction, but again, you want to play around with it. I may also want to apply a quick blur to this thing, just because it looks a little bit too sharp. So maybe a 0.5 of a fast blur to the asteroids to kind of smooth it out a little bit. And we'll call this one our ambient light. And now for the fun stuff, we can actually go and do some major color correction and grading. So we'll apply adjustment layer. We'll call this CC. And real quick, let me just go ahead and add some more asteroids here. It looks a little bit too empty. So we'll just increase the number of particles a little bit. Increase it. And then just reposition this thing. And maybe increase the size as well. And then so let's go ahead and go to the color correction adjustment layer. And for this one, I'm going to use Magic Bullet Looks just because it gives me so many options and so many variations in color correction. So we'll go into the edit. We'll go into looks. And there are tons and tons of variations. Some of my favorite are the invasion presets, which looks very dramatic, like some kind of Transformer movie. Neo, I'm pretty sure it's from the Matrix. Everything's kind of green and desaturated. I also like, let's go here to the people, and we have the Berlin and movie star, which looks very, very dramatic. And remember that all these presets here can be adjusted, so this may be a little bit too contrasted, but again, you can go in and tweak it. The one that I use, I believe, in the original is the coolish alternate one right here. May want to adjust some of these parameters, but I like the Berlin as well. Very sci-fi and blue looking. I think for this tutorial, I'm going to use the Neo one just because it's something different. So we'll select Neo. It kind of looks like that scene from Star Trek where those bad alien guys travel back in time and everything's all green and desaturated. But anyways, I'm not going to tweak anything here. We'll hit OK. And already things look a lot more blended in, looks a lot better. Now to finish things off, I'm going to go ahead and apply my InstaFilm script, a script that you can get for free by me from creativedojo.net. So I'm going to apply my InstaFilm 720p script, and that automatically creates some letterboxing as well as a grain layer. I'm going to shut that off and just use the grain within Magic Bullet Looks here. So we'll apply grain, we'll go to the tools, we'll go into post, and we'll select film grain. And then we'll maybe decrease the amount to maybe like 2% or so. And hit OK. And then just like that, we have a very dramatic planet slash smoky asteroid field here. And if we select our camera here, we can actually go ahead and orbit around this thing. So as you can see, we have a very 3D looking environment. It's not fully 3D because we actually have images in the background, flat images in the background to create the stars and stuff like that. But generally speaking, the asteroids are actually 3D. The planet is actually 3D. The lens flare is 3D. And for the most part, this should be sufficient for what you need to do. Of course, if you want to create a true star background, you can use particular or something like that. But this works fine for what I think most people need. Maybe just a very basic space planet scene. So again, a pretty nice 3D environment here, and you can just zoom in and go through and just do some awesome stuff here. But again, this has just been a quick tutorial on how to create a really basic asteroid planet space scene. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit on how to create this, and hopefully you guys had a lot of fun. I know I did. Stay tuned for the next tutorial where I'll be using Trapcode Particular as well as Cinema 4D to model asteroids. But until then, my name is Vincent Nguyen from the Creative Dojo. Hope you guys enjoyed the tutorial. If you guys have any questions or comments, leave them down below and I'll get to them as soon as I can. And once again, my name is Vincent Nguyen, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye guys.